maybe you can see me, maybe you can't. Oh yeah. So, welcome to Really Love Guitars. Something's buzzing away. Here we have Iain's Donna. Iain's Donna. Now, interestingly, this guitar is only fractionally top heavy. Now, we've exchanged the tuners already from the Donna ones, which were horrible, to actually really high quality Grovers. And I was worried when I put them on that it would be top heavy. And it is just fractionally, but it's not actually too much at all. So what have we got here? We've got the kind of one of the cheapest guitars in the world, or available today. Got me a cup of Saturday night coffee. Cheap guitar. Now, question really is cheap bad? Okay. Obviously, it makes a noise. It's an electric guitar. It doesn't look too bad either. You know, it's a sort of dark red-black sunburst with a bit of orange in the middle. But we have something that plays pretty well. Now, I've lowered it down to where as low as the bridge can go, and there is a constraint here in that the angle's slightly wrong on here, and so you can't get any lower or as low as I would like. So to rectify that, I'm going to put a shim in, which will be a little tin, no, not tin, brass, a 0.25 quarter of a mil brass shim, which I'll put in there, and that will lift the neck up and give me a little bit more adjustment room on here to get it down to where I want it. But even now, it's actually sort of playing okay. We've got two unremarkable humbuckers, but you know what? There's nothing wrong with them. So I'm putting this through the Jazz Chorus Clean sound with no effects, treble, bass in the middle, gain in the middle. Active, a good strong tone response. Totally muffled. So it's fine. So we've got two humbuckers, three-way switch, master volume, master tone, and nothing much more complicated than that. The neck looks like a kind of black teak wood, which I suspect might wear out or reveal something lighter underneath a bit later on. But now this up to a point plays okay. It's even come with a NuBone nut already fitted, which I think is clearly it's a standard fitment on a cheap guitar is pretty good. Truth is, with NuBone, it's not that expensive for the manufacturer to fit, so they've gone ahead and fitted it anyway. Now we're going to take that out and replace it with the Tusq, because I like the performance of the Tusq just that little bit extra betterer. Now before I changed the tuners, this was struggling to stay in tune, but that's really not to do with the tuners. It has much more to do with the fact that the strings hadn't had the slack stretched out of them, so they were going out of tune pretty easily, so you can still pull it a bit. And so, you know, this thing, if you want to crank it up to that old rectifier sound, So I mean, for a youngster in the bedroom with a little Roland amp like this, it still puts out quite a bit of so obviously a bit noisy for a tiny little amp like that, but still it does. Main problem here is currently going out tune, so I can keep on tuning it up and eventually it will stabilize. Playing last night. Brass in pocket. Right, so there we have it. You can see it works. So Iain got this for very little money, and I didn't ask exactly how little, but it wasn't much. And I think they retail in their kit with the bag and probably get a lead as well thrown in. You get a little soft case, actually not bad quality one considering the kind you get with some guitar kits. Yeah, so I'm quite impressed with it, and you know, I like simple guitars, so this is a simple guitar. It is your, you know, your slab-bodied thing, basswood probably. Pickups work perfectly well. The standard hardware, absolutely nothing unusual or bad about it. Switching works fine. We've got this, and you can see the colour. It's tech woody, black wood, or whatever they call it. But it, you know, it's a bit of a dyed looking stuff. We've got the rather deeply cut looking NuBone thing, and a, you know, an inoffensive Donna headstock there. And on the back side, obviously it's a bolt-on neck. I say obviously. The neck was loose when I got it. It's got a scarf joint here, finished in a very nice and comfortable satin finish anyway. We've got these big chunky Grovers on here, which haven't overpowered it weight-wise. We'll just take a quick peek in here, just for the sake of curiosity's sake, while I'm at it. Not with that we won't. Let's see what we have in here. Obviously it'll be simple. We've just got, if I can get this to work, we have got just 3 components really. 3-way switch, the master volume, master tone, and nothing else more complicated. But it's a big compartment, and you could do more interesting things in there. Now the question, or the key to that, would be whether the pickups in here are two wire pickups, or whether they're in fact 4-wire. And if they're 4-wire, we could do more things, more exotic switching. Well, looking straight at that, it's 2-wire, but you know, hardly surprising. But as you can see, a lot of empty space. You could do something. Now this is a bit off the off kilter at the moment, so what we'll do is, let's just get this, while we're at it, get this back to the correct alignment. So just, I'm sorry, can't see a damn thing. Doink. Back here, I'm just going to briefly undo this, which didn't need much persuasioning, and then we'll do this, and we'll do it back up. Get the right way around, that would help. Okay, so in here, the British summer, almost very nearly midsummer's day, and it's incredible that in this world it is 17 degrees cooler today than it was yesterday, which I find is amazing. I mean, that's an astonishing change. 17 degrees. Centigrade, Celsius, that big C thing, yeah, 17 degrees, mad. Okay, so 2-wire pickups, so not a lot of, well, no clever switching options available to you, but come on, for a guitar that's under 100 quid, I think, or maybe only about 110 quid with the baggie. Make your own music, says Donna. Designed by Tennessee. Okay. So, you know, simples. So what we've got to do? Well, we've got a few things to do here. The first one is, we could take off, well, okay, what I didn't show you, sorry, I'm jumping ahead. We have got some fret problems there. We're not quite even at my ideal action, and you can see there that this is choking out on the 12th fret bends. So the frets aren't perfect, but you know what? They're no more imperfect than many a more expensive machine that I've seen. So the same fret leveling treatment that puts many a more expensive machine, you know, fixes them, will do the same for this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the truss rod cover, so we can safely remove the nut as well. I'm interested to know, this looks like it's been hand shaped a little bit, so somebody's put a bit of time and effort into that, which for a guitar of this price point is a pretty good thing, I have to say. Okay, it sits quite low in the slot, so it's going to require a fairly tall. And the only question I've got is how much the finish runs up the side of this, and the answer could be a lot. So I think I'm going to have to do some careful cutting here, unless this, because it is beautifully glued into place, but I think it's over glued, which is always a slight challenge. And this is where I get lots of criticisms whenever I use my more destructive methods for removing nuts, but I'll come to that in a minute. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to slack off the strings, and we'll leave them on, and I'll remove the neck first of all, and we will put the shim in, and that way we can get everything up to its desired playing action right for the off. So we'll lock those in place like that. We'll turn it over. Don't know how the view is doing quite. There we go, average. And then we will use a torqued screwdriver. What I'll do is I'll put it face down because I don't want it bending the connection. Yeah, so we've gone from an absolutely sweltering hottest day of the year in the UK so far yesterday at I think it was 80 something, 88 degrees in London. It wasn't quite that, it was about 84, 83, 84 down here. It was 27 degrees in the garden here yesterday, and it's gone from that to this. And it's now 10, it's now about 10 degrees outside. It's actually 18 in here because this place heats up brilliantly. But anyway, so outside it is, are we running? Yeah, we're running. Yeah, outside about 10 degrees, which is rubbish. Well, comparatively anyway. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the neck as gently as I can. Oh, it's already got a shim in here. That's interesting. Humph. And it's got a shim in a odd place. It's a little bit forward of the... Oh, no, actually it's not. That's That's where the actual neck ends. Okay, I got it. I'll add my shim to that one then, basically. So they've already tried correcting, because it means they've cut it slightly wrong in their manufacturing. So they've corrected it as far as they could with the shim, but it actually we know it needs a little bit more. So some people like to get all mathematical about it. When it comes to shims like this, I know that my 1/4 mil shim will do. Will if my action is almost where I want it, but for a little lift, I know that a 1/4 mil shim will do the lift perfectly well, and that then gives us back adjustability, and we can take the bridge a fraction lower, because it's payable. It's just about playable where it is, but actually it's a little too high, and I don't have any more leeway for adjustment. So we do need a bit of lifting power from a shim. But interesting to see they already have one in there. Now that means they're correcting for when they would have put this guitar together in the factory. They would have noticed that it sat too low and that the action was far too high, even when you had the bridge decked out on the bottom, and they will have gone, right, we have to put a shim in here. And so that's what I'm sort of doubling up. Some people have particular viewpoints on shims. Some people, there's a kind of school of thought. Now this is interesting too, by the way. This neck has no end. I'll just show you this. This is often you get with cheap guitars. There's no end wall to the material. You've got the pickup ring. And in fact, when this neck is fitted correctly, the pickup ring is pushed in slightly, and that's because there's no exact position. Well, there's probably there's a position dictated by, they hope, the position of the pickup. So they will run the thing till it meets that, and I can see that where it sits naturally is a little bit too far in. But that's all we have got to work with, and it will ultimately be pulled into position by where these screws go into the heel. That's the bit that's been fixed for us. We don't have any room to play with that. So that's the first thing. The question about, oh look, there's already a shim in there. Do we want to add another shim? We don't really have any choice on a guitar like this. You either shim it or you stay with an action that's high. Actually, it's not strictly true. What you could do is you could shave the underside of the bridge down, and somebody who was frightened of using shims might choose that as their preferred option. Actually, there's no exactly right or wrong way. The arguments about shims, the efficacy of shims, is centered around this slightly strange idea that people think that the somehow tone can't get from the neck down to the pickups if you don't have wood-to-wood connection, which is a kind of highly, or quite a spurious sort of implied thing. I mean, nobody actually comes up with any scientific means to explain how this mysterious tone quantity, we don't even know what it is scientifically, but this tone thing, nobody tells us how it gets from the neck. Well, nobody even proves that it lives in the neck, but somehow it can't get from the neck to the pickups if you have any gap with air in it, or anything that comes between pure wood. There's a sort of purist take. So a lot of people believe that if the wood isn't touching wood, then you can't possibly have or you somehow lose tone. That's what I'm trying to get at. I just think that is unscientific and unprovable and therefore kind of specious argument. I mean, it's not even a credible hypothesis, far less any evidence to support it. And that's one of the things that kind of annoys me quite a bit about any and all, not just the guitar world, but any ideas that people have about the world. By the way, I'm just taking the advantage right now of marking up these frets ready for leveling, because I know that once I've got the nut fitted, I'm going to want to be leveling these frets out to make them play with the nice ultra low new action that we're going to set. Now Iain wants this to play ultimately very low because he's not got as good hand strength as he once had, and so getting this right for him is one of the things I'm keen to do. Now I'll show you the look of this. So you can see here we have what appears to be the finish kind of wrapping its way up the side of the nut. So I get a feeling that this nut has been put in and then finished into place, which is kind of, wouldn't surprise me. It's what is done in many of the current Chinese type or Far East factories, and it evidently saves time and money. Now what I'm looking at here is here's the amount of that surface that the truss rod cover covers, and we want to separate out this nut from there, and the way I look at this is when the nut has been glued in place as it has there, it will not come out without some kind of damage occurring. And the only real question I have in this is who's going to be in charge of the damage. So if I tap it this way, it's liable to splinter this all the way back. Some people like to say, well, get your sharp blade out, and they recommend that you score your way down here and miraculously somehow separate the finish from the nut. But actually what you get when you do that is it just splinters, because you've got to remember it's brittle, it's solid, it's glued and set solid. So I would prefer to be using a very fine blade like this to make a cut down into here, so that, as I say, I'm kind of in charge of separating these two bits from each other. And there's a kind of limit to how close you can get it, because you can't get it any closer than you can get it, if you sort of get what I mean. But this little razor saw certainly gives me, there's that little piece of, there may have been a little bit of flaking stuff there, but it certainly gives me more control. Now, I'm not even that keen to tap this right now because it will still have be attached to the front of there, so I would rather slowly work this down. But even this is it, when you cut into it, it has a certain width of cut, obviously, and as you go down into the finish, obviously that finish is still fragile and vulnerable to cracking, no matter how gently you take it. Now, I've cut these off before many a time with a Dremel wheel, and some people get really freaked out and say, well, they would never do that. They would only ever use a handsaw or something. And the problem with that is the problem still remains. The only real challenge you've got when cutting down into a nut in order to remove it is that you can't see underneath the nut, which means you can't tell precisely when you've got to the bottom, and therefore there is always a very small risk of you cutting into the nut slot, which is never the world's worst problem, simply because even if you do, the nut slot is, the shelf, if you like, is underneath the nut by definition. So even if you do cut into it, it's out of sight. But some people get, kind of scared off by that, so they think that's why you shouldn't do that. Anyway, so what I'm doing here is I am looking to at all costs separate out the front of this nut from this brittle stuff, and see whether it ever gets any movement. Trouble is, if I tap it, it's almost certainly going to make a crack. I can even see a little flake of fingerboard that's already sticking up here. It's just from, that was from before when they fitted it, but anyway. So I would probably end up getting the Dremel on there to cut this through. You know, some people again would say, well, what's wrong with a NuBone nut? And they may, for them, they may be perfectly good quality nuts. And you know, customers who come to me because they want the adjustable Tusq nut fitment that I offer, and so they come to me for that. Consequently, that's what I'll do for them. Now, just looking down this end here, just feeling how the front of the nut is glued onto it. It's actually got a little bit of movement now, so that could be removable without breaking anything. It had a little bit of movement in it, but again, if it wants to, it'll just pull the front of the finish off with it, which we can do without, until I'm absolutely certain we've got right down to the bottom of it. But we won't necessarily know. You might actually maybe able to hear the flaky sound of the finish flapping a little bit there. And we're quite, there you go, there's a little bit of clear finish flaking off as it tightens up, so it's hard to prevent it from moving at all. There's a bit of movement. Some people think, can you get it to move from under there? And you might be able to with a screwdrivery thing with a little bit of sideways leverage. Let's see if it will oblige me with a vertical up move. Yeah, actually it's not bad. It's not a bad approach. There you go, out it comes. So that gives me a quite, I'll show you now, it gives me a very deep shelf of the old lacquer. You see it there? That's very thick. It's about 1 millimetre a bit, and some wood in there as well. So that's all of that, sort of trying to prevent it from coming off. So we obviously have to be very careful with that. Now I'm just going to just test out for a moment. Now, first of all, let's just tidy up some of this shaggy spare stuff that's getting in the way down there. Right, let's see what we've got. That's actually, wow, that's an amazing drop-in, perfect fit. Now, the only question I've got is how well does this sit in here? So that's why I kept the strings on, one of the reasons. The other reason, of course, is I'm going to use the strings as sacrificial strings in the fret leveling process. Yeah, so this whole thing about, I've probably ranted about this before, but I'm very much a logical person, despite, contrary to what some people think. I may not be your version of logical, but I'm logical, and one of the ways I'm logical is that I'm a very firm believer in the scientific method. So, for example, if you are very clear in my mind what constitutes a credible argument about something. So, if you, I expect for somebody to claim to have an argument or to put forward an idea about something to explain the way something works, I need to hear a hypothesis. In other words, first things first, a claim. So you know what are you claiming? And if you aren't if you I used to be an academic, and I used to work in students with their dissertations, and all too often the university would kind of let them believe that they were claiming something when in fact they weren't. So they would put together an essay, and you'd say, yes, but what are you actually claiming? What's the premise of this thing? What are you saying? What statement are you making? Something about the world that you're claiming. And they really often struggled with that. But so take, for example, if you take something like this objection to using a shim on a bolt-on neck. So first of all, very often the person who believes that doesn't often tell you what the claim is. So behind their not liking shims, there has to be a claim or an account that they have about the way shims are and what they do to a guitar or the sound or whatever it is. It's not up to me to come up with that. It's up to them. If they object to shims, they have to explain to me what about shims it is, or what it is about shims. So I'm waiting straight away to hear a hypothesis, you could call it. You might hear someone say, "I hate shims, they're rubbish," and you go, "Okay, well, why is that? Tell me what your kind of hypothesis is about shims." Why, in other words, it's obvious. What I want to know is what about them is bad and why, and explain it. And for that to make sense, I need two things at least. I need you to make a claim that's coherent so that I can understand what you're claiming. So you need to say to me, well, this is what happens when people are forced to try and explain why they don't like shims. They all say something like, I hate shims on bolt-on necks because I think the wood should be touching the wood in the neck pocket, right? I think it's better that way. Okay, so there's your claim. I think it's better that way. Could you next? Sorry, there's three things. I need your claim. I need your explanation why that claim makes any sense. So you have to account for. You can't just say it. I think it does, and that's that. You have to tell me. You have to explain to me a credible mechanism why. So you say shims in bolt-on necks are bad, and I go, okay. Can you tell me why that is? What makes it bad? Explain to me why it's bad. And amazingly, a lot of people can't do that. They don't want to get pinned down in that. They go, well, I don't know, it's just I'm sure it doesn't. So I need to know what your claim is. I need to hear you coherently explain why. In other words, an argument. You have to give me an argument for why shims and bolt-on neck guitars are bad. If you can't give me those, I'm not even going to bother waiting around for your so-called evidence. But once you've given me, if you can give me your argument about why shims are bad, and I've never heard a credible argument. And the thing is, people kind of think they can get away with just effectively an equivalent of saying because they are. So you say to somebody, okay, I get it. You don't think shims in bolt-on necks are good. Can you tell me why? What happens with them, and why don't you like them? And then they go because they don't connect wood to wood. And you go, yeah, okay, that's an observation about it. You think because they don't connect wood to wood, they're bad. But that doesn't tell me. That doesn't explain to me why they're bad. It's an observation. It's saying that they are wood to wood. Yeah, I know that. I can see that with my eyes as well as you can with yours. I want you to explain to me why they're bad because there's no wood to wood connection. And some people just will not go past that. They've come to believe that stating observations equals submission of a coherent argument, and it absolutely isn't the case. So, by the way, I'm just taking this off again now because it's still a bit too high at the treble end, so I'm going to do a little bit of sanding to reduce it at the treble end. I want, ideally, with these adjustable nuts, I want to start with the string, with the nut fully down and the string sitting right on the first fret. Now I can do a couple of things here. I think I will. In fact, I can either both and try and take down the underside of the nut, which has a limit to what I can take off it, or I can take off some of, or clean this up, and I can feel there's some built up goo on one side of the slot, so this will probably help quite a bit. Yeah, so it's quite common for people to just mistake making an observation, and actually what's genuinely happening most of the time is people are expressing a belief system, and they think that's enough, and it can be very uncomfortable to be challenged to expand on it. So, you know, I don't like this, you know, preference. I don't like shims on bolt-on guitars, and the first thing I want to know is why. Why don't you? What goes wrong? Why is it not good? And it really is incumbent on the person to put forward an argument. So you have to kind of make a statement, state your position, support it with a coherent argument that makes sense to me and anyone else looking at this thing with you, and that's hard enough for an awful lot of people to do. And it can be very uncomfortable for some people to do. They don't wish to be challenged that way. And that is before even being challenged to provide any evidence, and that's usually where people's so-called positions fall down. So when I've talked to people about shims, they go, no, I don't think shims. And the truth is, you and I probably know that what happens most of the time is that they're expressing an unexamined belief. All right, that's the truth of it. And we mistake an unexamined belief for a logical position, a clearly thought out position, and we assume because we believe it that we've got, you know, good reason to believe it, and we assume that our actual lack of coherent argument or evidence to support that argument, we get tricked, we trick ourselves into thinking they aren't needed. And then somebody like me comes along and says, okay, I get it, you don't like shims. Right. And I would say, so to rescue that from just being a belief system that you hold, I would like you to give me a coherent argument for what is not good about shims, to help me understand why you don't like them. If at that point you just say, oh, I just don't like them, I'll go, well, it's not a coherent argument, and it's just a personal preference, and that's absolutely fine. You know, I get it, you don't ever want to have shims on your guitar, blah blah blah, but don't expect me to take your viewpoint particularly seriously, because it's just a preference. It's not a coherent argument about why shims don't work. So it's very common. It's very rare that anybody kind of sticks with it and comes out the other side with a convincing argument. I see it all the time in the world of guitars, but I also see it, I used to see it a load of times in academia, and people used to get very annoyed. I know, I can be very annoying. But a lot of the times they would get really cheesed off partly because to push because to push and demand first of all, so it's three things. It's a statement of your position, a coherent statement of your position. Second one part is an explanation of why, an argument for why you hold that position. And the third part is evidence to support that argument. So a lot of people didn't like having their points of view challenged, because I think for a lot of people, and I've been guilty of it too, we can bumble along for a long time, kind of fooling ourselves that our prejudices are rational, well thought out positions. Whereas in fact, the minute we try to give voice to a coherent argument that explains them, we discover quite quickly that they're nonsensical or illogical. And I think a lot of people that I challenged when I was a lecturer doing that sort of thing, I think a lot of people knew already that they didn't have much anything particularly solid underpinning their stance, but they were very attached to their stance, which again is very common for all of us human beings. We get very attached to what we think we believe in, and so the minute some swine like me came along and started to ask nasty questions, it basically threatened our ability to hold, or it can threaten our ability to hold on to that point of view. Oh, one thing I didn't check, I did earlier but not here. I'm just going to check that the relief is good on this neck. Yeah, that's perfectly good. Yeah, so that was the thing and I still do, you know, if I'm in a forum or whatever, or in a situation where somebody says one of these kind of dogmatic beliefs about guitars, there's so many of them, you know, the tone wood or whatever, you know, people say something with great conviction that they believe in to be true, and I'm not because I want to be a nasty person, but I want to know what your argument is. I don't just want you to tell it to me like some sort of magical belief. I want to know what it is that makes you think that, because actually, unless I do know that or hear it from you, there's no way I'm going to change my point of view. I can't learn anything unless you tell me something I don't already know. And so in asking, that's what I'm hoping to hear is, you know, that you've done some, I don't know, let's call it experimentation that I've never done, and from that ideally you've come up with a hypothesis that is interesting, and, you know, better yet, that you've done some experimentation with, and your experiment, or the results of your experiments, ideally will confirm or back up your hypothesis. Something loose. So I'm going to do a tiny bit more on the high E, but it doesn't seem to be taking very much. The choking is going to be addressed when the truss rod leveling tool comes across to the G track. That's where the choke out occurs on those high bends. So for now, I don't expect it to need an awful lot of work on the E track, and it all is cutting everywhere, so that's pretty good. Anyway, yeah, so that's my take on logic, and I don't know, maybe it makes me an annoying person or whatever, but it's, you know, I just encourage you to think of it in those three terms. When somebody's telling you something or claiming something, just be very clear in your mind. You want three things. You want to know their position, and they've got to be able to articulate it coherently. If somebody can't tell you as simple as, I believe that shims are bad on electric guitars because they interrupt the Gauss flow of the magnetic pickup field, blah, 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 blah. That's coherent. I might find it hard to believe, and then I would next I would go, I sort of see what you're arguing, but is there any evidence to support that? And then, of course, your job, if you want to be taken seriously, is to find evidence, or to create evidence through experimentation usually, that supports your position. And and typically, if you think about the scientific method, if you can't find evidence through experimentation or from previous experimentation and study, if you don't find evidence that backs up your hypothesis, your statement that X occurs because Y, then you don't get taken seriously. And a lot of people, not a lot of people, some people sort of put forward unprovable, untestable hypotheses and think they've kind of hit gold because, well, it's not testable, therefore nobody can disprove me. But the scientific method doesn't work like that. If you think shims are bad for electric guitars, the onus is on you to explain why and to demonstrate evidence to support that claim. So 3 things: articulation of the position, state the hypothesis, right? Challenge somebody to state their hypothesis, and if they say it but it doesn't make any sense, challenge them to state it again. It has to make sense, right? And it can't be just, oh, you don't understand it. There's a bad fret up there. It's a low fret. That's probably where that's freed up. So the 12, 13, 14, 15, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17th fret is low on this, and it's causing it to choke out. But it's a very low action that I've set, so I'm pretty pleased anyway with how it's going. Yeah, so challenge people. People can't hide in gobbledygook hypotheses, claims that don't make any sense. They've got to make sense to a reasonable person. And to be honest, okay, let's say somebody's a kind of superb guitar expert, and they're sort of trying to explain something or trying to communicate their hypothesis. You know when somebody's they're appealing to complexity, like, oh, you don't understand, you can't possibly understand because you haven't been a luthier for 300 years like me, or whatever. That fret is significantly lower than the others, and it's trying to choke out, so I can do a little bit more. But to bottom out a low fret, you're having to take down material from the surrounding frets. But it's not the end of the world. This is a new set of frets, so we're just aiming to get the lowest possible feasible action out of it. As to why a particular fret can be low when all the ones around it aren't, and that comes down to usually a little dip in the wood that you can't have any control over, especially when the guitar's under tension, full load. There's not a lot you can do about it. It goes that way when it's compressed. It might not be that way when the strings are not on and it's not under load. So, but when it is, it does, and that's why that fret is lower than the other ones. And we just have to do our best to bottom out the frets around it to free it up within reason. Eventually, you don't want to keep on hammering away at it, because you can kind of take half of, if it's really bad low fret, I mean ridiculously low, you can cost yourself a fair bit of fret life trying to eke it out or dig it out of its ditch effectively. And once you've done fret leveling for a while, you'll realise that low frets are the biggest enemy of the lot. They constrain what you can do more often than high frets do, which is quite interesting. So with the fret leveling process, what you tend to find is that once you get across into the bass strings and you have a low action set, because the bass strings move more than the thin strings, there's that dead flat, low fret. Because they move more than the the thin strings, you basically get what's called fret slap, which is, I've discovered, is it's kind of related to fret buzz, which is caused by individual high or low frets, but fret slap tends to be caused by clusters of frets. So instead of one fret high, one fret low, you've got one area high, one area low, one area high. And so when you're adjusting, or when you're trying to level to remove or eradicate what I call fret slap, which is caused by there not being quite enough room for the strings to move, which are moving more than the thin strings because of the ups and downs of the fingerboard, you're sort of doing leveling, but you're doing it kind of zoomed out with a view of the whole board. And so at that point I really want this curve of this bar to push itself into the uneven fretboard. So I want the bar to kind of, I call it, impose itself, the curve, the perfect curve of the fret bar, or the banana as I like to call it. I want it to impose itself onto the uneven curve of the fretboard. And to do that I sort of tend to hold it in the middle and just go backwards and forwards. Now I can see there is a cluster of low frets in this guitar around the 19th. There it is. We'll come back to those, but I think that's probably, we might do a little bit more at that end, but I'm just getting everything else where I want it first, and then we'll concentrate on those low frets. But there will be a limit beyond which I don't want to go to grind away at the rest of the neck, because you can't do it on spot leveling. This is, if there's too low, there are, let's say, too low frets here causing this problem. They're only really, there's a limit to where leveling runs out of efficacy, you could say. When we first of all, we have to sort of know, was that dripping? Is something leaking? We have to know when we're at that point. And then we have to look at what the realistic options are after that point, if you don't want to keep on taking fret metal to try and bring the overall hills and valleys under control. And the simplest way to get around that is to raise the action a tiny fraction, which actually you'd be amazed how little of a raise it takes to free up the action. So that is, we know where we've got the problem, 19th fret. Let's just look at what we've got as the action, because I sometimes set it too low to begin with. Okay, so that's dead on 1. So first port of call is I can raise this a tiny bit to get to the point 1.2, which is my normal target action, which is there. And then this one is dialed in at just under 1.5. So again, I can take this up a tiny fraction to my target action here. So we know what the cause of that is. I'm going to now go back and I'm going to calibrate for each of these tracks again, and I'm just going to focus on this far end to see if I can improve that at all before we kind of stop and don't go any further, because like I say, I don't want to over level. I haven't at the moment, it's very little, but I don't want to grind away more than necessary when a tiny concession in playing action might be the smarter move, but I like to try and get where I'm going first. So now we know that the principal area is in fact here, where the guitar joins the neck, the body, neck joins the body. Those two. So what I'll just try to do with my leveling doofer is I will try to just put a little bit more pressure on this top end to bottom out this part of it, and I'm not really too bothered about the other end. I'm just letting the gravity touch that. I want this end to kind of do a little bit more digging, and basically, you know, it's very difficult. It's hardly touching those 2 or 3, I would say, and you can see there's a couple of frets either side of it which are taking a fair hit because of how low, relatively low, the other 2 or 3 frets in that gap are. But that's a physical constraint that we don't have any ultimate control over. We can't. The only way you could do something about it might be to pull those frets out, put taller frets in, and then you'd be faced with the challenge of bringing those down to match up the surrounding frets too. So in a sense that would have its own set of challenges, which I'm not entirely sure how easy that would be. I've never done it because it's never practically turned out to be the right decision. Just about. Yeah, it's never turned out in my book to be the right decision, because I think fitting new frets leaves you with almost as much, if not more, hard work than working existing ones. A bit more curve needed. So, like I say, the last run here now is just to focus on the far end of these tracks, which is where the problem lies. And I can see, and I'll show you now, the amount of material removed. So we've got the problem area right there. Okay, these frets are low, and you can see that I'm having to take quite a bit off here and here, and these are low, and then we're having to take quite a bit off here and here. So everything either side of this gap is having to take the brunt of leveling, and there's no way around it. That's the kind of constraint we're working under, and that's a quirk of however it ended up that those frets are lower than others around them. And as I say, it could well be the result of just a natural kink in the wood dipping down at that point, and of course it often will depend heavily on what the material and the construction of the neck itself is. But yeah, that's quite amazing. Just about eked it out. Just about eked it out. So the amount of leveling that I'm doing on this end now is going to solve this problem at a cost, but actually by the time we've recrowned it, we really hardly will notice the cost part of it by the time we sand everything out. It looks a bit harsh at this end of the neck to begin with, and I think that's one of the aspects of leveling that comes then, or requires the experience to be confident to do. Nearly good. I mean, pretty good actually. So we'll get there. So I've got a sense now of how hard I need to work that particular patch to make it, get it back to where I want it. There we go. One more after this. Yeah, there's no, ultimately there's no mystery about this. This is, sometimes when it doesn't do what you expect, or it doesn't seem to be going right, we can all make the mistake of kind of feeling that the approach we've taken somehow isn't up to it, and there must be something else going on that we don't know about. And actually, it really isn't. You know, this is a an organic wooden neck with some frets banged into it, and there are vagaries and variables in all of those, all parts of the way it's constructed, and we have to just keep in mind that there are a limited number of variables and no black magic involved. You know, the frets choke out because either one is higher than the rest, or there are some that are lower, which kind of cause the following ones to play higher. And that's really all there is to it. Tiny little bit of choke there. I just want to check that. That's on the G track. I'm going to do one more tiny bit of the G track up there, because I want that fully cleared for action at the chosen playing action. Okay, that's the end of my levelling. You sort of know it instinctively, and I know at this point, if that doesn't play the way I want, including this challenging top bend, it's on the G, so, and that is pretty damn good, I'd say. Still very low. Now if I take a tiniest little tweak there and go, playing just this side of the G. I'll do one tiny bit more. I'll do this in the B track this time, and then I'm done. Promise. So the thing to keep in mind here is that the amount of work I'm doing at this end now is ultimately caused by 2 or 3 frets that are sitting in a ditch, courtesy of a kink in the neck that the manufacturer has very little, or has little or no control over, far less us. That's good enough. Yeah, they've got no control over, and we have none. So it's just the luck of the organic draw. That's what you get with weird organic materials. Can't predict it, can't really fix it easily, other than by what we just did. So after that fairly strenuous levelling game, now I'm going to remove the strings, and they can go in the bin. They started out with 10s, but I think I double checked, but I'm pretty sure Iain wanted 9s. And so we'll next thing I'll do is the, what's that word, recrowning, because having levelled the frets, we've made the frets slightly flat in different places, different amounts on different frets depending on the amount of excessive height they had. So next job will be to reshape them whilst not changing the height, and that's quite a nifty little process. So well, off come the strings. Let's chop them, just to make it easier to get them off. Yes, so there you go. Remember, for future reference, if somebody continues to tell you something that actually you get, and your instinct tells you it's more like a belief or dogma, just ask them to, encourage them to articulate clearly what it is they're claiming. What is their hypothesis? What are they stating happens and why? And then, even if they can do that, which in my experience is quite rare, it's quite a difficult thing to do if you don't have clarity about what, it's actually difficult to do if you don't actually have a hypothesis. It's as simple as that. If you just kind of have a feeling about it, when challenged, you will not be able to articulate a clear hypothesis, because truth is, it will never have been anything other than a sort of belief, well meant or otherwise. I'm not criticizing it, I'm just saying it doesn't qualify, it's not raised to the level of coherent argument or hypothesis. So what is the statement? Why, how and why, and then the final bit is the evidence. Okay, you claim the wood, when you lose wood-to-wood contact, you claim that the tone vanishes, and you've shown me all these scientific diagrams about how wood does this and that when it's touching wood, and does something the other when it isn't, and you've shown so-and-so's argument about how that leads to a reduction in vibration of the sound box, yada yada yada. And that, okay, I get it. I see there's a coherent argument behind this. I'm not sure I believe it yet, because the next thing you're going to need to do is you're going to need to point me at evidence either from experiments you've done or evidence that other people have done that point towards your hypothesis being a very likely one. And actually, even if you, at the point of telling me what your hypothesis is, as a scientist, if you were a scientist, you would still have to do your own primary research to test your hypothesis, if your hypothesis is new or innovative. If you're claiming that a gap between the wood of the neck and the heel has a negative impact on the guitar's X, Y or Z, and somebody's already done this experiment, then of course you don't have to do it. You can just point me at that experiment, and I can read the whole case study, or the whole paper if you like. But you have to treat even the simplest of things, you have to treat them with that kind of discipline, because if you don't, then what happens is that dogma quietly takes the place of truth without us knowing, and we all sort of end up, notice I don't have to do anything with these frets because they're too low. They didn't even vaguely get touched with the leveling beam. So this goes to show. That's what you'll find, by the way, when you come to do the recrowning. You immediately know the spots you're on, the high spots, because you have to spend longer cutting with the recrowning file, and far less when working on the ones that were low, because they didn't even get touched by the leveling beam. So these three haven't taken anything off them, which just backs up exactly what the experience has been of working on this neck. So it only confirms what we already know. And here's the final countdown. Right, that's all the dust off. I quite often get questions about dust. Actually, people don't say dust; they say filings, right? So they go, "Don't you get filings on the, stuck to the magnets on the pickups?" And the answer is no, because actually they're not filings. By the time that the dust gets on anywhere, or by the time I'm making dust that way, there's nothing magnetic about it. It's purely dust from the sandpaper. I'm just gluing that nut in place. Now I know where I want it. Yep. Yeah, so it never, has never and will never stick to the pickups. But people still, it's one of those dogmas, people still don't believe it. They keep on asking, but surely, no, it doesn't. It's not magnetic. And then the killer is, even when I told them that it isn't filings, it is pure dust at that time. Even if they accept that, which they don't, they say no, but it must still stick to that. And I go, it's not magnetic. It's copper, brass. Is it brass copper mix? Copper nickel, which is or nickel. It's nickel steel, so it's copper and brass, whatever. It's barely got any. Even to begin with, it's barely got any magnetic quality about it at all. So it won't stick anywhere. But even if it did, it won't, because it's just dust. Anyway, what time is it in the world? The time is currently 20:08. Okay, so I'm going to take time off the camera. Or shall I? No, actually I won't, because you know why? Because I hate shutting the camera off and then it conks out battery. It might just run out anyway. Memory-wise, my my iPhone has been struggling to do a whole video for a while now, so I quite regularly find it conks out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just carry on, because I've got to get it done, and it's time to do or die. Anyway, so much as I'd like to stop and listen to some radio or something, let's just crack on. Anyway, so how are you all doing in the 112th day of whatever it is, the Ukraine? Oh yeah, what did somebody? Yeah, the war, Russia's war in Ukraine, and I heard a really sinister but subtle thing on the news the other day. A British newscaster referred to Ukrainian war crimes. Now what they actually meant was Russian war crimes committed in Ukraine. But that casual laziness of just referring it to that way really hit me, stood out. And it's casual, it's lazy, but it's powerful. Ukrainian war crimes, Ukraine, war crimes, Ukraine, bad Ukraine, war crimes, Ukraine. I just thought, wonder how that came about, that term was used. And I just thought, actually, it's probably just carelessness on the part of the journalist, but it really annoyed me. And of course, there's no one to really feedback and have your venting at the journalist concerned. Too much effort to try and find them and track them down, or even hope they'd see your message. But language is amazingly powerful, and I'm just rereading a book by Victor Klemperer. And he was a Jewish professor of literature, Romance literature, I think it was, in Germany in the 30s, and he and his wife. Now, he was a Jew. His wife was, I think, she was a Gentile, therefore non-Jewish, and that made him sort of half, because I think that's the case. I don't think she was. I think he was saved from automatic persecution by her Aryanness, whatever. Anyway, but they didn't save him completely, because even Jews married to Aryans suffered and were persecuted in the end. Just took a bit slower, I think, for them fractionally. Anyway, it's an incredible diary of his observations of living in Germany, as he always had done. He considered himself a German, full stop. But of course, with the coming of the National Socialists, he discovered that he wasn't a German anymore, which is a pretty awful thing. And so the diary is this whole litany of tiny steps towards insanity that the German people took. And one of this is a connection. One of the things that he writes regularly in his diary, because I think he's a kind of literature and language specialist. One of the things he has is a section in his diary where he comments on the language of the Third Reich. He observes it. He finds it fascinating, the language they're using, and he, of course, being a victim of German anti-Jewish propaganda, he's very alert to Goebbels at the time, the way Goebbels changed the language to put Jews on the outside of German society, and then so far on the outside that they were, game for destruction and torment. But yeah, the thing about that language, it's so powerful, and even he knew it and was fascinated by it. And a lot of the persecution that happened to him and his wife and their people they knew in their social circle came through the medium, or came in the form of language changes. Suddenly you weren't allowed to call yourself this, and suddenly you were now referred to as that, and suddenly you could no longer refer to something else as something. And the foreword on the back of the book says something. This is not the kind of, something like the maelstrom of the Holocaust. This documents, Victor Klemperer documents the slow descent into brutality, and I think I've paraphrased that completely wrong, but the amazing thing is his diary, it's not like Hitler gets in, suddenly it's the gas chambers and the pogroms. It shows a so-called civilized country disintegrating bit by bit, or slipping bit by bit into barbarism against a particular group of people. And I think when you read this, then you get to see some of the steps that perhaps a lot of people who wouldn't have read it wouldn't realise. So he slowly, bit by bit, the Germans take away his rights as a lecturer in the university. They restrict who he can teach. Then they restrict his salary and force him to donate money to the Reich and its resurgence. And then it stops him. The Germans forbid him to publish anymore. So the money he used to make publishing academic papers, he no longer can make. So he's in financial dire straits. And then they basically relieve him of his post, because a Jew cannot work in that university in that post anymore, and so he's forced into retirement, and then they decide how much money he can get per month, and he has to survive on that, and then they sort of progressively take that away from him until he's got nothing. And it's a truly horrendous bit by bit, but the things that sort of catch you are how it comes to a point where, I think I read a bit just the other day where they loved their cats, him and his wife, and they had two at one point, and they were a member of a sort of cat club, a bit like people are today. They're a member of this cat club, and suddenly it changes. And instead of being, the cat club, it becomes the German cat club. Oops, I'm going to do something. And it turns out that before long, only Aryans can keep cats. So first of all, the cat owners club, prohibits Jews from being part of it. And then a bit later on, it ends up with Jews being forced to put their animals down and prove they have done that. And it's really tragic, because one of the things you see throughout his diary is how much joy and peace of mind, if any, if he gets any peace of mind, it's what the animals bring him and his wife. Anyway, so imagine being, we think of gas chambers and all the obvious horrors, but imagine the horrors of not being allowed to work, or not being allowed to travel on this bus, or not being able to go to work in this way or that way, or not being able to keep a cat, and then not being able to walk on the same path as Germans, and not being able to shop only on these days, and so on and so forth. And it is a catalogue of growing indignities that's slow and banal and yet unspeakably cruel. And it's an amazing book to read, to listen to his state of mind. He's very depressed this whole time. He's a fairly old guy, in inverted commas. He's not a youngster. He's in his 50s when he started writing the diary, and 240, 180, 240. Yeah, so he's already kind of oldish and tired-ish, and he thinks he's always got thinks he's got heart problems and eye troubles, and he's depressed the whole time, and his wife's got constant teeth trouble. So it's all the horrors of being Jewish in a growing, emerging Holocaust, plus all the horrors of middle-age health issues that anyone who gets to middle age knows about. And often he asks himself in his diary, he suggests that he won't make it. He just can't see how he'll survive. And when you read it, you think, God, why would you bother? If you felt, if I felt as I do now in my middle to older age, and then I found myself being treated that way, would I try and stay alive? Would I even bother with all the horrors being perpetrated against me? Bloody hard to tell. Anyway, despite the fact that he's convinced he's not going to make it through, he somehow does, and he survived the war, he and his wife, and they survived almost accidentally, I believe, and I can't remember now, it's been so long since I read it, but I believe that they were about to be hauled off to the concentration camp, when Dresden, where they lived, was firebombed by the British, and in that terrible, catastrophic event that history records as the Dresden firebombing, basically everything just collapsed, and he and his wife sort of escaped out of that madness, and there was no more German order. It was just a burnt city and people wandering in all directions, and so they managed to walk away from it, and as a result survived. But it's incredible that they were just lining up to be, or they were almost inevitably going to be destroyed. This is going to be noisy, sorry. So there's a great piece of writing in a book. It's called I Shall Bear Witness. And I think it resonates with me more because I'm his age, or close to his age. I'm probably older than he was actually now, but around his age, when he had to face that terrible ordeal. But I don't think, like quite a lot of people who I have read, writers who I read who survived the Jewish Holocaust, quite a few of them didn't emerge happy from it. You sort of, there's quite a few who you want to believe came out and had a successful life, and to go on and thumb their nose at the Nazis and live a wonderful full life despite them, and actually the experience damaged so many of them beyond repair that quite a lot of them killed themselves or died young, which is really sad to have survived that, to die young still. Mind you, Victor Klemperer lived to quite an age. But I don't think he was happy. In a sort of similar way to, no, I don't like this. In a similar way, those who remember the story of Oskar Schindler, you know, it's like he was a kind, decent man who saved a lot of Jews. Actually, as well as being a capitalist, opportunist, bad boy. But he, sort of when you learn of his story, you desperately want him to survive the war and live the charmed life because of the good thing he did. And he didn't. He had a sad life and was pretty lonely. And ended up failing in a couple of businesses, one of which was he grew or farmed this kind of food mammal, like a giant guinea pig. I think it was called a nutria. Sounds like some sort of crustacean grown in tanks, destined for the cooking pot. But anyway, he ended up broke and alone in South America, I believe, and yeah, died pretty unhappy. Of course, the Schindler children, survivors, remember him and commemorate him to this day, or the descendants of his workers who only survived because of him. Anyway, I must look up the gauge of strings that we want for this one. Just bear with me. 2025. Emails, Iain, come along. Oh, here we go. Donna. Whoops. String gauge. Oh, okay. Sorry, they were. I will change for your setup. I've had a few hours with the guitar. Keep the string and G string and tune. Stock strings are not on 942. They're easy to bend. I will change to 1046. Okay, we will use 1046s. Ooh. Sure is tipping it down out there. Anyway, yes, this story of Oskar Schindler. How did I get there? Oh yeah, Klemperer. How did I get to Victor Klemperer? Because of the language. How did I get to language? Because of saying things enough times that they become true. And how did I get to that? I got to that by talking about Ukrainian war crimes. How did I get to Ukrainian war crimes? Through dogma and repeating things often enough that they become true. Or something like that. Well, I'm a week after, a week or 9 days after my tooth pulling. I had a cracked, split filling or split tooth for a long time, sort of being held together by an old filling. And a few months ago the dentist said, oh yes, it's split here. Well, why don't we could get a crown on there and that would stabilise it and probably last for years. So I said, yeah, fine, let's do it. So I don't think did we book it? I can't remember. I went out and we were going to book an appointment for it. I had to go and sort something out. We were going to book an appointment, and then within a day or two it started to really hurt. So I rang them up saying I was in absolute agony actually. So I was saying, you know, are there any emergency ones? And he said no, but you can go to the NHS if you have to, which I didn't want to do. So meantime I booked in for the earliest possible thing, which was the 9th of June, which is about 6 to 8 weeks away. And I just kind of held it together between then and the appointment. And I could tell in the meantime that the crack had really widened, and I think the filling kind of fell apart and dropped out. And so I was lucky in that I only had a few days of extreme pain in that gap in between. And it came around to the 9th, and I went along last week, and I wasn't at all surprised when he said, no, can't save that anymore, that's split right in two. So I hadn't kind of gone in fully expecting to have a tooth yanked out, but that's what it turned into. So I don't know about you, but teeth being pulled out has always been one of my private nightmare kind of subconscious things. Whatever it means in Freudian terms, I don't exactly know, but either way, I've always had bad dreams about teeth coming out. And anyway, so here I was facing a real blast of human mortality, having somebody yank out a tooth that's going to be thrown away and not put anything back in its place. And so I sat there for an hour and 20 minutes in total, I think, and had it done. And we got the first lot of anaesthetic in, and he was starting to kind of do the scrunchy thing, and he said, I said, that's hurting a bit. He said, do you want some more? I said, yeah. So he gave me a couple more big shots, and the fact that they hurt like hell going in was probably a very good, kind of confirmed that it was a smart move to go for the extra anaesthetic. So after that I was pretty much unable to feel anything, thank God. And he did some kind of wrenching and crunching and scrunching, and I had a Bluetooth earplug running off my phone, and I was listening to an e-book just to take my mind off it, which actually helped a bit. I was focusing on that and not what he was doing. And yeah, then it was done, and I saw the tooth, which is funny to see a tooth that you'd had for most of your adult life and then said goodbye to without any time to think about it, and left it with him, and off I went. But it's taken at least a week to kind of stabilise. And funny enough, I saw my brother posting on Facebook today that he found himself with tooth problems in the middle of the night last week and had to go to the dentist urgently, at which point they pulled out one and installed him. He had a bridge that broke, so they pulled out another one, extracted another one, and then did 3 implants in his, which will no doubt cost him an absolute fortune. But because he's a TV motorsport presenter, and does TV and video-y type stuff, then his good looks are so important, whereas mine obviously don't have any impact at all, at least not positive impact on my YouTube revenues, runaway business success. Anyway, so I just thought it's funny that they're similar, very close in age, so we both reached that bit where the teeth we was bequeathed with, left to us, kind of run out of usefulness around about the same time, which is, well, not all of them, still quite a few working, but yeah. So yeah, funny time to have to say goodbye to. Not so much saying goodbye, it's more like going, right, this is the beginning of the end, where all my systems start falling to bits and breaking down. That's it, I'm doomed. I think that's something that you get to look at anyway as you get older, but it's funny when, something about when it's teeth, you go, right, because my old dad hasn't got, he's got one tooth left, bless him, and obviously I've got quite a few more than that, but I'm only missing one. But having said that, you know, you kind of think, oh, is that my destiny? Is that where I'm going to end up, with no teeth at all? I hope not. I pray not. Not for my nightmares to come true. I brush my teeth regularly. Anyway, so we have done the levelling, we have done the crowning and the polishing out, and you can see here I'm just getting rid of any dust. Always difficult to make a gloss guitar shine, because as soon as it does, it picks up dust. So I'm just going to clean the fingerboard and get rid of any marker pen that's still on the frets. You usually see a nice load of grime coming off. And then the next step will be to put on the new strings. I'll wash my hands first to get rid of any grime, put the new strings on, stretch them out thoroughly, and then we'll sort of complete the setup and make sure everything's intonated properly, stretched out and intonated, that's what we want, and then we'll be done. Oh. Hey, wouldn't it be cool if Epiphone invented a grab-o-matic tuno stability device, or whatever they called it? I know they have. And it stops their bridges falling off. How wonderful that is. Right, oh yeah, I'll put some oil on the neck first, after I've stabbed my finger with a scalpel, which you've of course got to do. Dust everywhere. No, not magnetic filings dust, I mean ambient dust. Right. Yeah, so a week to 10 days since kissing my one molar goodbye, and thankfully it was a back one, so you wouldn't know, but I do. Feel it all the time. It's like, there's nothing there. There's a tooth missing. Right, I'll carry on talking to you while I wash my hands. I've got to go back out in a minute in this rain to get home. I'm a bit later than I planned, so I hope Claire hasn't starved herself waiting for me. But it's got to get finished. I did a few other jobs tonight before this one, so while I was letting things charge up, including a final bit of rewiring on my TV yellow double cut, including, what else did I do? Something else. Oh yes, I sanded back the spray jobs from the day before yesterday, which is cool, so they'll be ready for another spray later. Okay, let's go. So when I use the adjustable bridge, sorry about these deadly boring camera angles. It's just difficult to keep finger prinks off this at the best of times. Yeah, so when fitting strings with the adjustable nut in, what I suggest is, this is how I do it. I start with the D and the G string, which isn't those two, which is these two, the D and the G, and so I aim to pin down the nut first. So go through with the D and the G. These are a set of 10s, yes, right. So come up to here, and then what I do is I get all of my pegs lined up in the same direction. Yes, yes, yes. Yes, yes, yes. Yes. Which makes things easier. And then I get the G onto the G peg, and this is what I do. I pull it taut, line it up on its saddle, pull it taut, and then hold it over the first fret, and I tend to pull back one fret and hold it down like that. Then I wind it on here, holding tight with my thumb, but just enough to allow the held string to ride over the loose string, and as the loose string comes round underneath, I grab the held string, pull the loose string up, and then with some finger gymnastics to keep the tension on the held string, I guide it under the loose string this time around, and just keep it there until it comes round again, and then I let it go into the into its slot on the nut, and then I cut off the excess there. So that's the amount of wire I want on there, and it's also pinning down on the G, so that holds the adjustable nut in place, so there's no risk of it going anywhere. Oh, I tell you what I'll do, let's put this on here while we're at it. Let us where's the thing? A little tiny thing I'm going to do as well. One of these strap buttons is a bit loose, so we need to check that as well and fill the hole if necessary. So then I go with the D string, same thing, up to the first fret, pull back one fret. This time I can hold it from this end because I'm left-handed with the winder now, and I'm keeping the held string under tension, goes over the loose string first time, and then pull the loose string up and guide the held string under the loose string second time round until we drop down, cut flush to the post so we don't get any stung fingers, and then do the top two because it's like delayed gratification. They're the annoying ones because they're back to front. They're left, not left. I have to work left-handedly, so I put those on first. That one and that one. So same old B string through the post, line it up on its saddle, on its slot, hold it at the first, pull back one, grab the winder and wind on. And if it doesn't look like it's going over the loose string, then I lift it up and guide it over, as well as then guiding it under for the next time round. Side of things, and then sometimes I'll cut the thing back while I've got access to the string because sometimes it comes round and it's in the way and you can't cut it, but that's okay. And then the E string in the slot on the post. Now, having done some polishing and stuff, I have to remember that my the bridge has been lifted off and I've polished around the posts and probably turned the wheels, so I expect the action to have changed. So I'm definitely going to recheck that as well before I call this complete. I don't want to get kind of caught out with it having gone any lower without you realizing it, because you might suddenly think, God, it's not playing, and you've wound it really low. Okay, and then the final two strings, the A and the low E. Now with the adding the shim to lift the neck a little bit, it means we'll probably just bring the pickups up very slightly from where they are now to compensate. We don't want them too far away from the strings. Yes, I've done this a few times before. Swing. Okay, all strings on. Ah, the weather is hideous, man. Right, let's just have a quick feel. Which one is loose? It's the bottom one's slightly loose. Let's see if I can just tighten it first, or whether it needs something more extreme. Middle, thank you. Good. Right, so, oops, zoom out, can't see what I'm seeing. Doink, doink, thank you. Something like there. So, first thing I'm going to do is put the E on its saddle, and then just give them a sort of a pull to settle them in. And then remember, the action is probably changed, so I'm going to make sure I get that set up first before I do anything else. So get rid of that piece of spare string, cut off. Then we get the measuring device, string height device again, and we check the string height. Doink. Millimeters a bit low, so we have wound it in a bit. Okay, 1.5, and that's a bit high. Well, high for me, that's 1.2. Now I'm going to tune once again, then I'm going to do some more stretching. So in case you haven't bored you with telling you this before, tuning stability on your guitar comes down to two things. It doesn't come down to your tuners. The reason Iain upgraded those tuners was to get better gearing precision out of them, so they're smoother and feel like much more higher quality, much nicer to use, much more precise to tune to the spot you want. But they only hold tune as good or as bad as the ones he took off. So tuning stability comes down to two things. The first one is the condition and material of your nut. And the second one is the amount of slack still held in your strings. And those two things together will be what puts your guitar out of tune as and when it goes out of tune. And you have to stretch those strings out as thoroughly as I'm doing here, if not more, if you want the guitar to play. You've noticed how each time I stretch the strings, the guitar goes out of tune again, but it goes out less each time. So we're eventually getting rid of the slack, and we have to keep doing this until it's stabilized and it doesn't detune it when we do this, as close as you can get. Could take half an hour if you did it thoroughly. Anything less than that is sort of skimping on it a bit, and you will have to sort of pick it up as you go along. But it's the combination of the nut slots being made of a material that grips or abrades or creates friction on the strings, and the slots being slightly ragged or narrow and hold on to the strings. It's that plus the unreleased slack that causes all of your tuning problems. See, that's much closer now. Now, there's a bit more, actually more relief on this guitar now, and I think that's because the previous strings were, maybe a tiny bit more. I think they were 9s, but they felt right. We're at the limit here. Let's just check this again. I'm going to pull that, straighten the neck just fractionally. I think it's showing a slight difference. That means we've gone up a gauge in strings, which I wasn't sure whether we did or not. Because I thought the ones that were on there were 10s, although I couldn't work out whether Iain had changed them for 10s and they were originally 9s, or whether the ones on there were 9s, but I think they were 9s, judging by the slight change in relief. So the change in neck shape is something that happens at any point throughout the year. It's common that it will happen, and what you need is to get your truss rod, and if you've got more curvature, in other words the neck's got more curvature that way, you tighten your truss rod by turning it clockwise as you look at it, this end, and turning it clockwise will straighten the neck out. It will counteract the pull of the strings. Now how much is just a matter of trial and error. So I did 2 little twists there. Okay, so that takes that down a little bit, which means I can bring this up a little bit because it's flattened the neck out a fair bit more, all told, and that's a little bit low now. So it does affect your playing action, but I always try and point out to people that the truss rod isn't the primary place you go for adjusting your playing action. You want to do that with the nut and the saddles. The bridge, saddles and the nut. Okay, next bit, last bit of the process, intonation, and I think I'll do this on the strap because it's easier than balancing it on something. I don't know how well this views. So we've got the action where I want it. Now the tuning has been stretched out, so it should be much more stable, and now the next thing to do, no idea what you can see and what you can't. The next thing is to do the intonation, and the intonation is a measure of distance. It's a business of distance. So each string needs its own individual playing length or scale length, which is a bit weird because we tend to talk about a scale length for a guitar. But it's too long. That's good. Let's pull that in. So the fact that I did a pinged the 12th fret harmonic, and then I fretted at the 12th fret, and they should be the same note. So I tuned the ping to the E note, and then I fretted the 12th fret, and I should have got an E, but in fact I got sharp of an E. So that tells me that, did I have it sharp or flat? Bloody hell. If it's sharp, that's not good. Try it again. Let's get this registering properly. It's flat. That's what it was. That means it's too long, which means I need to bring the saddle closer to, if I can figure out which way it goes, and again, closer to the saddle, to the nut. So I'm going to bring it forward. Looks like it's already been moved away from where it probably came, but good. Okay, it's all looking good. Bring this closer. Stay. This is not so good. This is out of order. Bring this forward. You should have a familiar pattern with a tunematic bridge, and this one is currently not showing the familiar pattern. So I'm going to do quite a bit of adjustment to get the familiar pattern out of it, and I'm at its stops on the D for a minute. That's it. Now I'm going to bring forward the A and the E somewhat to their correct positions. So I can usually, as long as I know one of them, I can pretty much set the whole bridge in line because I know one. They relate to each other in a very dependable way. and this is about where it should be. Intonated perfectly, and there we have it. Oh, one final thing. The pickups. The old story, where should my pickups be? Well, they should be nowhere particular. They should be anywhere you want them to be. The rule of thumb only says the following, that the closer to the strings the pickup poles are, the greater the output. But the lesser the tonal dynamic. The further they are, the lesser the output, but the greater the tonal dynamic. Okay, so this is now flattened out. Yep, this is very, very, very flat neck. So I'm happy with that. If it should flatten out any more in your environment, then you need to go in with your adjustment truss rod, as I just did, and you need to allow the neck, you need to set it, tweak it counterclockwise to allow the neck to pull a little more, or allow the strings to pull a little more curvature. So counterclockwise to allow the neck to bend, give it some relief. Clockwise a little bit to straighten it out a bit more. And the question is how much, and I wouldn't say any set answer. I would encourage you to play around with it and try it and see, because that's the only way you're going to know what it does and to be able to ascertain the difference between them, which works best for you. Now I've currently got it set pretty flat, which it seems to like, and it seems to be happy with that. Whoops, get my string back on the right thing. Seems very happy with that. So I would, if I were you, I would leave it there and only change it, but be confident and prepared to change it. Don't shy away from it. You can't do it any harm. The stories of people saying, oh, you mustn't adjust your truss rod in case you do X or Y to it, it's absolutely nonsense. You can't do any damage to your truss rod. I mean, I've tried to break them in the past deliberately, and I've struggled to do it. I'm just attaching to the stop bar here your little hex key that goes with the nut, so put that somewhere safe. That will allow you to raise or lower the nut. At the moment the nut's set beautifully low. I don't think you should need to, but you may at some future time want to check it or adjust it, and again do it to where it works well for you. That setting now is as low as it will go to play all the notes cleanly, but it's beautifully low. It should be a joy to play, and it will stay in tune. That's the other great benefit. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that, and particularly Ian, I hope you enjoyed seeing your guitar being set up in this rainy, almost midsummer's day. See you again soon for another one. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.